Thank you very much to give us the opportunity to explain to hopefully a broad public, what Euro-Argo is, but also what our data are and how to handle them. And so I'm really happy to present first our infrastructure and then these specific topics on governance. So please next. So maybe I have this short video that shows yes, an Argo float and how it's deployed. And so you see, so from the surface, you just let it drop. And then, so this float won't remain at the surface. When it's at the surface, of course, it's localized by its GPS and it could perform data transmission. That will be at the next cycle anyhow. And also receive some instructions about the mission. So to which depths it will dive. You see it diving, but in fact, yes, it will just drift during 10 days without doing not too much thing. It's recording on the way up after having dived down to 2,000 or to 6,000 meters. And when it's at the surface, all the most recent data will be transmitted by satellite. So this program with these autonomous platforms has been launched in 1999. The idea is really to get a 4D view of the ocean, of temperature and salinity first. And since it's drifting during 10 days, like I said, between two emissions, you can, in fact, deduce what is the current at 1,000 meter depth, because that's the parking depth where it's just drifting. The data from the very beginning are open and free. Please make sense. There's another also short video here that show the deployments, not from the very beginning, but from 2001. And well, when you see this kind of very rapid arrows, that's the deployment lines. But then you can really witness I would say, the activity of the ocean and or the fact that you have much more dynamic on the tropical belt, or much more dynamic also on the western coast. You can also witness the fact that it's kind of difficult to have an even coverage over the ocean. And at the beginning too, the floats were aimed at being deployed between 60 north and 60 south. You'll see that there's been a new design in between. The floats are drifting like this during 4 to 6 years after they die out. And that's just, alas, I mean, a small share of the fleet that we can recover, around 10% at this time. And we try to enhance this figure, especially we're working on it in the drought program. And maybe we can go to the next slide. What's really important about Argo is that since the very beginning, it's been an international program. So here you can see more than 25 countries, at present 27 countries that have operational floats today. And in fact, as a whole, there are more than, 35 almost countries that have contributed one day or another. You have main contributors, of course, I will talk about that later on, but on smaller contributors, but every contribution is welcome. And when I was talking about the even coverage, the initial goal was to have one float every 3 degrees by 3 degrees in every pixel of 3 degrees by 3 degrees. Okay, next. Here again, because it went quite fast in the video, you have a scheme of, in fact, the process of these autonomous floats. So most of them, the initial mission, dive down to 2,000 meters. All of them have, or should have, there are some exceptions, but a parking depth of 1,000 meters. Some of them go deeper, down to 6,000 meters. And some, also part of them, we call them the BGC floats, or biogeochemical floats, carry not only temperature and salinity sensors, but also pH, way to assess the particulates in the water, chlorophyll, nitrate, oxygen, and irradiance, which gives a hint about the light in the water column. And so, as you see, these are very different parameters, and I will come back on the fact that it's a set list at the beginning. There are also some experimental sensors that can be plugged on the floats, and again, within the George project, there are also some experiments and pilots that are running. Next slide, please. I was talking about the initial design. Here is a new design, not so new now because it's been set up in 2019. But we have not yet achieved the increase of the total number of floats, which would be 4,700. We're at 4,300 something, about 4,400 right now. We have not only what we call the core floats, which are with temperature and salinity, but also the deep floats that carry also temperature and salinity, but go down to 6,000 instead of 2,000 meters, and the BGC floats. And the ultimate goal for this so-called one Argo design is to have 1,200 of deep floats and 1,000 BGC floats. And all of them are core floats, so we just call core float the remaining, but the whole set is really important for the coverage, is to have this 4,700. We have an assessment that, of course, is a bit increasing by time, but which is at the full cost of this network. For running this network is 100 million euros or dollars, it really depends, but it's close, or even pounds, if you want to enlarge it a bit, and a year. And this comprises the renewal, the refurbishment of the fleet by new floats. Okay, next. So this one Argo extension is that now it goes towards the pole, the polar regions, and also that it should also cover the marginal enclosed sea, like the Mediterranean, the Baltic Sea, the Black Sea, and in these marginal seas have a double density. And this double density, you find it also in the intertropical belt and also on the western boundaries of the main oceans, where you have these boundary currents. Another aim of this one Argo design is to have to be able to measure down to 6,000 meters. In fact, I didn't enter into this detail before, but there are also floats that just go down to 4,000 meters. And this is justified by the fact that 90% of the ocean is above 4,000 meters. So it's widely enough. But you have trenches, of course, where it goes much deeper than 6,000 meters. But the technology today is to go down to 6,000 meters. And next, please, are the BGC. So I already enumerate what are these sensors, the biogeochemical sensors. Each time there was a picture of the float. In this case, the float has to be bigger because it has to have more energy, more batteries. And well, for the measurements and also for the payload, which is also bigger. And but the aim is always the same, to last at least 4 years. And you have also this condition for the deep floats. Next, please. So nowadays, if you look at the operational floats, there are 861 active floats carrying these BGC sensors. But if you look carefully at this map, when you have these blue circles, that means that you have the full set of BGC sensors. Well, you see that it's not always the case, and because that's quite costly. Something I didn't mention yet is that the cost of core floats is 6 times less the cost of a full BGC float. So this is why also, I mean, budget constraints are hampering the deployment of one Argo. And today also, there's another issue that I mean everybody should be aware of, is that BGC was really mostly supported by the US, and especially one big program called GoBGC, supported by the National Science Foundation. It will be supported until October this year. After that, well, there won't be new US BGC floats launched, or very few of them, not at least in this program, and they will slowly die out. So there's a big risks to be less informed in the future years than what we are now, except if you have more efforts performed by other countries. Next, please. So now I will really enter into some governance issues after this presentation, because I thought it was necessary to present the network first. You know, so this is under the auspices of, from the very beginning, from the IOC, which is the UNESCO Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission. And in general, what's been agreed, I mean, at the international level, on that, these are diplomatic issues there, that oceanographic observation shouldn't be performed in the EEZ of another country by even a marine scientific research vessel, without requesting in advance the permission. And usually it takes around 6 months to get that. However, for Argo, and since 1999, this so-called 26 resolution has authorized Argo to perform these measurements of temperature and salinity in the EEZs without prior approval. And of course, some countries can disagree with that, so ask to be notified, and to be notified in advance if ever the float could enter in their EEZ. And so in some cases, the coastal stage could, I mean, ask to stop. Maybe tell me if I'm wrong, Romain, but I think it never really happened, even to say to stop measurements. But that could be the case. Yeah. And there's a list, in fact, of contact person that should receive these notifications. Now in 2017, well, this one Argo design was also recognized. And that means that not only temperature salinity, but also the 6 other parameters have been included in the set of measurements that are concerned by this absence of prior question, whatever. And of course, then this has been implemented, and there are also, you can even find, if you click on the slides, if you have the class slide afterwards, find the proper resolution there. Now, this also, next please. There is also the fact that Argo data are, you will talk about this later on, I think, about the use of Argo data. There's a big operational use, especially by the Met offices, because it's very useful for the coupled ocean atmosphere weather forecast models. And so there's a WMO policy also that is also mentioning Argo. And since then, 2001, an Argo Information Center has been created. Now it's called Ocean Ops. And before each deployment, Ocean Ops is notified and provides a unique WMO number. That's very, very important. If not, you're not an Argo float, and you're not authorized to go in the EC, etc., etc. Here you have also the list of the countries that request notification, and yes, Egypt has really asked for stopping. Sorry, I was asking a strange question before, and okay, so there are procedures for that, and but it's really important to be aware of these issues. Next, please. So there's a unique focal point given for each country, and so if you go in an easy, you need an MSR approval if you deploy there first, and of course it's not very the procedure is not very pragmatic, because very often it's really difficult to know exactly when the deployment will take place, etc., etc. But there can be also some mismatch with that. And so anyhow, the place where to find out where those flows are and if they enter this EEZs is the Ocean Ops website. Next, please. About the governance of the Argo international program. So there's an international Argo steering team and a data management team, and they have a representative of the countries that are providing floats. And there's also a framework that explains how a country can join the Argo program by setting up a national Argo program. There is one person at Ocean Ops who's a technical coordinator, and which is working just in the same doorway as we are at Euro-Argo ERIC. And Ocean Ops is responsible then for monitoring and coordinating the systems at the global level. And so you see the three missions here, and the fact that there are these two teams. The Argo steering team is the one really that takes that endorses new decisions, etc. And Argo data management team, who does the work of enhancing the metadata or specifying many procedures, etc. Next. So Euro-Argo in this is taking care, like Maria said at the beginning, of the coordination of the European contributions. And today that means 12 countries within the ERIC. There are also some countries that are deploying outside the ERIC, but which are European countries, like Denmark, Portugal, and soon Belgium. And there are also some countries that would like to enter the ERIC. But again, I mean, this the aim of Europe is to cover 1/4 of the fleet. That's the case today, but the US are covering up today now 56%. And this figure might decrease, so there might be some evolutions there. Next. Then Euro-Argo, it's a team with an office. So the first people talking this afternoon, except Guillaume, who is from Argo France, are belonging to this office. And then you have some governance body like a council, which is like the executive board of the ERIC. Then you have for more technical and scientific decisions, a management board. That is the one that we took, with which we are talking most often. And you have the ERIC office. And we also have an advisory group. And we are talking closely with Argo International, like I was already mentioning. And I mean, Claire will describe the many users we have. Next. And so we have a strategy for that, which is really to maintain and expand the EU fleet to really a second goal, which is really to support the scientific and technological development and enhancement. Goal 3, which is really around the data and developing all the data services, and around that also all the metadata improvements. And we have a goal to really support the communication towards the users, towards the stakeholders, towards the decision makers, etc. And we are also another goal, which is to strengthen our governance, but I won't go deep into this. Next slide.
So I will present some of our main data use. So because, as you know, we are a research infrastructure, so our main user community is obviously the scientific research for different applications such as climate, ocean processes, ecosystem, the carbon pump, etc. But we also have another very important community of users. This is what we call operational services. So basically, these are the people running ocean and climate and weather forecast models, and also the satellite community. So Argo data are used for model and satellite calibration and validation, and also in some cases, mainly in ocean models. The data are also used through data assimilation, and for them, the Argo data is actually the main source of data below the surface, and it's very complementary to the data that they get from satellites. And I also listed here data aggregators because so the Argo data, as Yann-Hervé mentioned, are open to everyone. And so you can get Argo data through very different access, as Clara will show. And so we have a lot of products that use Argo data to produce some other products. And next slide, please. So about the scientific research community, so this graph shows the number of publications about Argo. So the blue bars are the total number of papers mentioning Argo, and the yellow bars are for the European, for the paper with the first author being in Europe. And so this is something we do to track this, because for us it's quite important, because as our data are completely open, it's sometimes difficult to know who is using them. So having such a record is very important for us to see the application of Argo data. And what is important for us is also that we try to push our user community to acknowledge the Argo data. And so we have an official acknowledgement that we ask people to mention in their publication, so that we are able to track the use of our data. So the other community, so what we call the operational users, we also try to maintain links with them, and so we We have regular meetings with this community, both from a scientific and technical point of view, to try to keep them to keep this community aware of the implementation of OneArgo, because as Yann-Hervé said, we are not there yet, and so also there is a high demand from this community, and also it is important for us to discuss with them to try to answer their needs as much as possible, and also to discuss collaboration opportunities. And on the more political level, we also have discussion within the Copernicus Institute activities that is coordinated by the European Environmental Agency, to try to advocate for the OneArgo implementation, because for now we don't have the OneArgo array is implemented by scientists, but we don't have enough funds to achieve the OneArgo array for now. So this is important for us also to advocate, and we do this through different level, and at European level, this is mainly within the ENVI community. Next slide. And just to finish on this subject, this is I wanted to highlight this paper that has been published recently, lately last year, from Thierry et al., which is actually a paper that was written by the scientists implementing Argo, together with the end user community from various domains, scientists, but also operational services. And the aim of this paper was really to show all the different kind of application that Argo is involved in. So if you're interested, I encourage you to read this review paper. And that's it for me. Thank you. And it's me again. So we split this presentation on the Argo data system in two. So I will start, and then I will give the floor to Delphine. So this is just a brief overview of the Argo data system with the main actors. So the scheme on the right show basically the different data flows and who is involved in the Argo data management, from the float deployment up to the use by the end user. So this system is managed at international level, because from the beginning within Argo we had a common format, which makes that everyone can, each country who deploys a float can also have a look at float deployed by other countries. This was set at the very beginning, which makes things quite easy. But when we want to evolve this format, then it has to be done at international level. And we also have common procedure for quality control. So the floats, they send their measurements to what we call data assembly centers. There are 11 in the world, 11 DACs, and 2 are in Europe, one at Coriolis-Ifremer in France, and one in the UK at BODC. And then the data are made available through what we call global data assembly centers. So there are 2 DACs, what we call GDACs, sorry. One is in the US, and the other one is in Europe at Coriolis-Ifremer. And they are both mirroring the Argo data from the early beginning, so that if there is an issue in one, people can still access the data through the other GDAC. And in this schema, you also see the OceanOps. As Yann-Hervé said, OceanOps is involved in Argo through they take care of the registration of the floats to ensure that everything is in line with the IOC resolutions. And they are also in charge of the monitoring of the array to try to help us coordinate where to put the data, where there are gaps, and to try to coordinate this. So as I said, This data system is managed by an international team. So we call it the Argo Data Management Team. So it's international, and it includes a representative from the DAX and the GDAX, but also delay mode quality control operators, scientists, PI, and all various people, operators as well, float operators, and everyone who is involved from far or close to the Argo data system. And within this international team, there are a lot of task teams, so they can be just for one topic for one specific period. But and these teams work on specific topics, and they report to the Argo data management team during the annual meeting. So these annual meetings last for 1 full week, where we discuss all the Argo data related issues. And during these weeks, we agree on the data format evolution all together. And we also discuss new vocabularies and the method to correct the data and to make the quality control. So I will just briefly show the 3 different data flows that we have in Argo. So as you know, our data are available in what we call real-time mode. So it might not be real-time depending on so this is our vocabulary. And when we say real-time, it means actually that the time between the float measures and the user can get the data is less than 12 hours. And so in this flow, there are some automatic quality control tests, and which is done at the DAC level, and then the data are made available through the DAX and also through the GTS, which is becoming now the WIS2. So this is a World Meteorological Organization system to provide data to the operational weather forecast mainly. Next, please. And then we have what we call the delayed mode. So this is the data so the delayed mode data are the data that have been assessed by experts. So these experts in the Argo world are called delayed mode operators. And so they get the data from the GDAC. After about 1 year, after 1 year of measurements from a specific float. So this is done float by float, and then they do the correction if required, and they send back the data to the DAC, and the DAC make it available to users through the GDAC. And we also have a third data flow. This is just because when a delayed mode operator detects a need for a correction, then it's applied to the past profiles. But if the float is still active, we apply what we call that a real-time adjustment to the upcoming profiles during the life of the float. And that's it. And then I will let Delphine describe more the data architecture of Argo.
Thank you. Yes. So now, if we are looking at the architecture, if you're looking at how it is internally stored at the GDAC, you will, right, so here is the HTTP access to the GDAC. So on the right, this is how it will appear. And in this folder, you will find several information. There is a dark folder, which sorts the data by data assembly center and then by float. And we will show how it is inside this repository afterwards. There is a geo folder, which sorts the data by ocean basin. There is a latest data folder, which includes the most recent data, if you want to do some recent updates. And there is also an aux folder, which contains data from experimental sensors. And the files here on the top are the index files. So these index files contain a list of metadata information on each type of Argo data file, and this is to ease the exploration in this internal architecture. Before we change slide, just to mention, this is a direct access to the internal architecture, but later in the webinar, we'll see also subsetting services, which may be like more convenient for some users. Yes, please, next slide. So as you may know or not, the official Argo data format that is available on the GDAC are in the format of netCDF files, which was chosen because this is a self-explanatory file and which is now a widely spread format. Inside this netCDF, the architecture complies with the climate and forecast metadata conventions in its version 1.6. So if you are looking in under one DAC, so for instance, this is an example under DAC Coriolis for the float with its WMO ID 19.00068. So you will find a series of files. There are 4 files on the top, and then the profile that are in a subdirectory. So you would have, so one important file, they're all important, but one important also is the meta file. So here you see underscore meta. So all the meta information is gathered there. You have also a tech file. The tech file is mainly for the operators because it contains all the technical information from the float when it's at sea, such as the battery or the hydraulic consumptions and how it behaves in the water column. There is also a trajectory files because we are also recording information throughout the cycle of a float. As Yann-Hervé mentioned, there is first a dive to drift depth, and some measurements are made along this trajectory, and so this file is gathering this trajectory information. And the last file here is the profile. The profile is a concatenation of what is under the profiles directory, so that it is when you want to deal with a full float life cycle. When a float is equipped with biogeochemical sensors, so here we took the example from the George float. You also have an S-profile file. The S-profile file is a synthetic profiles, and its particularity, it's also a concatenation of the profiles in the profiles directory, but all the variables are along the same pressure axis, and so it is the work of the biogeochemical operator. Next slide, please. So here is a view of what is inside the profiles directory. And here the name of the files follows some convention. I won't go into much detail for now, but if you want to have an explanation of the naming convention, it is written here. Next slide, please. And so in these files, you will find, of course, the measurements, but also the quality control. And so in real time, you will find all parameters with their quality control flag. And it will appear as the parameter underscore QC. This is to record the automatic test results and also over manual quality checks. These tests, these automatic tests, they test some things like the platform identification, some impossible date and location, some global range tests, some spike tests, etc. So there is a full list of tests. It includes both generic tests, I mean common to all the parameters, but also parameter-specific tests. And this is all described in the document that is on the bottom of the slide with the DOI. When it comes to delayed mode, so we are providing adjusted data. We always keep the real-time data, but we add one more parameter, which is the parameter name _adjusted, with its own adjusted QC value as well. And this is done by analysis of the float time series by expert, as Claire mentioned before, the delayed mode operator. And it includes possible correction for sensor drifts. On the right side, you see the QC flag scale we are using for Argo data. These scales are described in our vocabulary, which is exposed in the NERV vocabulary server. And there are some links here to the tables that describe them. And so yes, I let you, but mainly we are using good data, QC1, and QC for bad data. And we'll show you some example in the webinar afterwards. Yes. This next slide. Okay.
Okay. Hello. So Delphine and Claire presented you the Argo data systems with the main use that we have is through netCDF files, but we have also decided to provide some web interfaces that give quick and easy access to most of the files and data collected by Argo. So there are actually two web interfaces. One is called the fleet monitoring, and it's more focused on the float by float navigation, where we can see all the metadata, ocean parameters, trajectory, and technical parameters mentioned by Delphine. And I will give you a short demo of this web interface just after that. And we've got another web interface that is here focused on profiles, really. So whatever the floats is just mainly for scientists or people wanted to retrieve a specific set of Argo profiles based on either variables or region or time period. And they can make that selection in pretty rapidly and then download the file to use them either as a CSV or netCDF files. So I will start with the fleet monitoring. So here is the dashboard, or actually I will go on the, okay, so you don't see, I see. So here I'm on the fleet monitoring web interface. So it's divided into three panel. So it's the dashboard. On the left panel, you've got some selection box, which allows to select a specific set of floats. And then the list of floats is given into a result table here. And on the right, we've got a map with where each dot is actually the current position of the Argo float. So you can see that to date we've got 4,270 active floats. Since the beginning, there were like 20,000. And so it's all interactive, so it's pretty easy. We can make an advanced search, or we can either look at all the floats, for instance, deployed by the UK, and you have their position on the map here. We can also look at all floats that are equipped with a specific sensor. So if we look at, for instance, all the floats having a RBR CTD sensor that are currently active, we can make that selection pretty rapidly. We can also look at some PI or for like the scientists they can look at their floats. For instance, if we look at all the floats for a specific PI, the person can access them very rapidly. And finally, we've got all the metadata available. I'm gonna give you more example of the floats that were deployed in the framework of the George project. So here I'm gonna look, so I will move from the dashboard to the what we call the float pages. So here it's really an overview. It's the same data as Claire and Delphine showcased before, so through netCDF files, but here you see that in a web interface. So we've got the main information with the most valuable metadata, such as the identification, the country that owned the floats, the status, the number of profiles that the floats actually collected. On the map, we can see the trajectory of the float. So if we look at this float, we see what's deployed here in the North Atlantic Ocean. We can see the dots here. So each dot is a specific Argo profile collected, are pretty close together at the beginning, and we will see why. And then after the floats escape a bit the area with more distance between profiles. Here we actually have for each profile, we can have a quick plot of the data collected by the floats. So here it's a temperature profile until 2000 decibar. We can have this live and download the data. Okay, and we can make that for all the profiles. We have also some pre-computed plots that showcase what so here on the section chart that I'm showing on the left, you've got each column is a profile, and they are stacked together through time, and this gives us the evolution of temperatures through time at different depths. We can see we have this for each variable that the float collects. So here is for oxygen. For pH, here we see it's written no valid data. That's refers to what Delphine and Claire showcase, is that it's more the status, the current status of the data. Here we talked about flag, and for instance, the pH data for this float is still a flag of 3, meaning that the data is supposed to be good, but is not checked in what we call delay mode quality control. That will be soon. And then, so it's still available. You can download that, but it's just a different status. So actually all the data is there. I was talking about the metadata. So if we go this window, if we go in the all metadata section, we've got many more information about the sensors. We have the serial numbers of each of the sensor mounted on the float with the calibration coefficient displayed and so on. And we can see also the evolution of the different mission settings through time. And here we can see that at the beginning, the floats, when it was deployed, it was parked at a specific shallow profile at 300 meters, then 1000 meters, and that it was performed almost daily cycle. It was because it was deployed within the frame of a George cruise, where there was many instrumentation around, and we wanted to do some intercomparison exercise. But then after about 2 months, after cycle 62, the float was set back to a standard Argo mission of 10 days. And this is why the dots on the maps are more spaced, because there are 10 days between profiles. Delphine mentioned it. We can have also a look at all the technical data of the floats, such as the number of pump or valve action where it took for the float to dive and drift. And we've got some basic information also by battery. Here the float is new. But if I go back to the dashboard, for instance, we can see that then. So I'm here looking at every float, and we will see that some of the floats are quite old, and their battery is going to fail. So, for instance, if I take this float, if we look at so it was a float deployed in the Norwegian Sea, and here we can look at the battery voltage. And so this takes a bit of time with my connection. So here we can see the voltage going down, and we've got some predefined thresholds alerts to inform us that this float will die soon, and we can try to maybe recover it or change the float mission to try to save energy and so on. Okay, I will go back to okay, sorry. So this is all about the fleet monitoring I wanted to show. I can take any question, just to say that there is on this help page here, we've got a complete user guide that's describes all the features and how to use the website and to retrieve the information that you want to look to. And if I go back to the presentation, what I wanted to say is that the links with another project that we are involved in is the AMRIT project, where a notification center has been developed to help centralized and relaying metadata, data, and technical alerts to network operators. And so, for instance, the battery voltage alert that I mentioned earlier is now directly for people who subscribe to alerts, either on technical topics which I'm interested in, but also for the QC, the quality control of the floats. If there are some flags that are or floats that are that we think are bad, we receive notifications through either emails or through an interface. So that's something very relevant for Argo and Argo operators. So I stop here. I don't know if there are any questions on the fleet monitoring interface.
So just as a reminder, so we've had the real-time data coming through to the data assembly centers and to the GDACs, and then usually the goal is within 12 months, or every 12 months, an Argo float undergoes delayed mode quality control, where a group of experts looks at the data and assesses if it's good or makes adjustments for specific variables where adjustments need to be made. So this is a shortened version of the delayed mode workflow as an overview. So the first stage will be to visually quality control the data to see if there's any outliers, or to look for specific features which are known to be bad data. And so these can be immediately flagged, changed from perhaps a flag of 3 to definitely bad data. And there's various tools that can be used for that, including Scoop Argo and Ocean Data Viewer as well. And so after this, we have the data that should hopefully all be good and just needs to be corrected. So there'll be an estimation of correction coefficients for the account for physical and biological phenomena that affect the sensor measurements. And these are all established protocols that are available within documentation that's online. And I think one of the previous links took you to, had a DOI, which took you to the overall Argo QC protocol. And then within that, there's the links for specific variables. And so different tools have been developed to QC different variables. And we have, for instance, OWC, which Delphine will go into for salinity, and then different variables developed across countries for different tools for different variables developed internationally. And so after the data has been adjusted for corrections, it will be further validated against independent data sets where possible. And then these files are written to BD files, which, well, for biogeochemical Argo floats would be written to BD files, which are it's the delayed mode file. And all of the methodology used for the delayed mode quality control will be recorded. And then these files are checked before they're uploaded to the DAX in order to ensure consistency and making sure that the rules that we've established as an international community are upheld. And then these then go to the Global Data Assembly Center. So as a reminder of what the QC flags we have, one, we're hoping that data is coming up after being adjusted as 1. So that's good data. And generally for data that needs to be quality controlled and adjusted before it's used, then it's generally flagged as a 3, which means that it's considered bad data at the moment, but it's potentially, hopefully, correctable. And so these colors are important for the next slide, where for the tool that I use can be used to change quality flags. So this is an example of the George float that was deployed at the Port Brown Abyssal Plain location that Roman just showed. And this is the interface of the Scoop Argo tool, where we can load in the profile data, and we can look at the different parameters that have sensors on the floats, and look at on the first set of profiles here are the dissolved oxygen values from the real time. And then the doxy adjusted is when they've been changed, corrected. And we can change, at the moment, all of the doxy real-time data is in orange if it's considered potentially correctable, and then where it's red is where there's bad data. And so, for instance, for dissolved oxygen, we're looking at artifacts at the base of profiles where oxygen profiles are known to have what is known as a hook, which is this image on the left where the data suddenly decreases or increases just at the base of the profile. So these are flagged as bad. And then on the right figure is showing an example where we determined that this entire profile was an outlier, and so the profile was flagged as bad. And now I will pass over to Delphine, who will explain some methods of QCing salinity data.
Yes. So yes, here is really to give you an example of one workflow for the salinity. And this will be a brief overview. I will not go into all the details, but there is a documentation if you want to know more. So for the salinity and to adjust the salinity, we are using a tool called OWC. This is standing for a method developed by Breck Owens, Aini Wang, and further improved by Cecile Cabanes. So the acronym is by their family names. This is used to correct for a CTD sensor drift. And it is to perform this correction or to estimate this drift. This is based on reference data. So the reference data that are used are composed of highly accurate CTD casts, and so performed on research vessels. So we have a database of CTD casts that is maintained and which is yearly updated by Christian from Coriolis, and this is made available to all the delay mode operators. This reference data can be completed by casts that are not yet openly published. For instance, in the George case, we have access to CTD casts, and we can make the comparison before this goes through the update of the official database of CTD casts. This can be also completed by Argo floats data, former Argo floats data that comply with a series of good behavior criteria that is really constrained. And we do that because in some places the CTD cast may be too sparse to perform a good assessment. So we complete with that. These reference data are mapped to the vertical profiles location. And to do this selection, we are accounting for correlation scales. Two kinds of correlation scales, one short-term and one long-term variability, both in time and space. And these correlation scales may differ with respect to the region where the profiles are measured because of the variability of the region. And there are maps, so I said it was mapped to the vertical profiles location, but it's also mapped in the potential temperature space. So not exactly on the pressure, but in potential temperature. And this is because we want to keep water masses consistency when we do the comparison. So the tools are available on GitHub. There is a MATLAB version, which is the historic version, and there is a Python version also that has been developed recently, so that we can, for people who have difficulties to have MATLAB, it's a nice alternative. Next slide, please. So here are some outputs of the tools. So I took the example of the George float because, of course, it's a George webinar. There is a link to the report here. So the first step is the reference data selection and availability. So what you see on the left side is a map of the floats profiles. So it's a little bit, it's in the center, it's blue to red. And the pink dots here are the reference data selection. So, and as I said, it is selected in space, but also in time. On the right side here is a view of how many reference data are available. So this is on the top is for around 2 degrees of the profile, and on the bottom is in 4 degrees around the profile. On the left, it's within 2 years, and on the right, this is within 5 years. And what you see here is that we have not yet CTD cast within 2 years. Of course, this is a float that has just been deployed, and for the moment, our CTD reference data set has not been updated for this period of time. And this just means that we will have to do again the delayed mode processing in some period of time to account for CTD cast performed closer to the profile state. Next slide. So here, this is the result for this plot of the comparison between the profiles data and the reference data. So basically here, what you see is that you see 4 different theta levels. So you can think of it as 4 different depth levels, but it's theta levels. So the raw data or uncalibrated data is the blue line. The calibrated data after the method propose something is in green. And as you see here, this is in the same line. It means that for this plot, no drift has been observed. The bars in red, this is the mapping error. And so on the right side, this is a proposed correction, and the proposed correction is given in conductivity, but you have an estimation in salinity. So it suggests not to correct, basically. So this plot is behaving well. Next slide, please. So what is important also is to document what we've performed in delayed mode. And so this documentation of the methodology that has been used and how it has been applied is performed in the netCDF file itself. There are 2 sections. One section is the history section. So here, normally this is an array, but for the sake of simplicity here, I've just put the index presenting the delayed mode process step. So we have different information, and so here we say that in the reference, we say that we are using the MATLAB OWC software, using some reference database, the CTD version 2024 version and the Argo 2023 version. Then there is also a scientific calypso section where we have we mentioned the equations, the coefficients of the equation, and any comment that is of interest. So for this case, this is no significant sanity drift detected. And we have, of course, when the calibration has been performed. Next slide, maybe, please. So yes, I thought this example was too not showing a lot. So I've selected another example for a float that is crossing the south and on the Antarctic front. Here, so for this float is a little bit different. So you still show the float's trajectory here from in the top left figure. And you have still in purple the reference data that have been selected along the trajectory. What you see on the top middle panel is the temperature section. And what is clear here is that the float has crossed the front at cycle 58, something like that. And so we have to select 2 different sets of a temperature to perform our estimate. And this is displayed here. So this plot is very particular because there is a large bias. There was a large bias at deployment, and we also see in the bottom left that this float is drifting, and so we have a proposition of correction by the software for this drift that is displayed on the bottom right. So in this case, we document that in the profile file. We put the equation that has been applied as well with the correction factor. So it was just to show you an example where a correction is needed. And I hand it over for a next example that Clara will be presenting on dissolved oxygen. So you will see over tool that are used to assess correction for this.
Yeah, so for all of the biogeochemical variables as well, they all need to have delayed mode adjustments applied to them. And so I'll give an example of dissolved oxygen because it's one of the sensors on the George float, the other being pH, which the adjustments and QC done to the DMQC carried out on pH has to be done after the dissolved oxygen DMQC has been carried out. And so for the case of dissolved oxygen, there are several required adjustments that need to be checked for and applied in order to have good dissolved oxygen data. And so this will be the calibration as well as the optode storage drift. So if the when the oxygen optode is in storage out of the water, it is known to drift over time. And once the oxygen optode is in the water, it's relatively stable. And so we have to do adjust for this once the float is in the water, and we can compare the data to reference data sets to see how much the sensor has drifted by. And then another required adjustment is in known oxygen minimum zones, the minimum offset of oxygen needs to be checked to make sure that this zero or low oxygen concentration is properly calibrated for. And so tools have been developed in Europe and also across in North America and the US and Canada to make these, to identify the coefficients that are needed for these adjustments. And so Locadox, which is a MATLAB tool, and with PyDocs, the Python version in development, and Henry Bittig's tool have been developed in Europe. And they all will use reference data sets. And we've got 3 different methods that can be used, with the gold star, the best one being if floats have in-air oxygen measurements, then these can be compared to atmospheric reanalysis tools such as NCEP and ERA5. And this comparison can provide the optode storage drift adjustment value. And so here's an example of not a George float in Locadox, where you can see the colorful lines, colorful thin lines are the float profiles of dissolved oxygen. And then the black solid line, which is offset to the right, is the reference profile. So you can see that all of the data is offset from what ideally it should be showing based on presumably this reference profile is probably a CTD sample that was taken around the same time as the float's first profile. So within Locadox, we can put in this data, and we have in the blue points, the floats, the Argo floats water, the dissolved oxygen, but actually this is the partial pressure of oxygen in the surface reading, and then the red points are the in-air measurements, and then in comparison is the National Centers for Environmental Prediction values, and you can see that the black points are slightly higher than those that the float is measuring. And so when the tool reads all of this data in, it can suggest a slope that is applied to the data to bring the float data more in line with the reference data that we think that it should be measuring. So the blue and the pink points in this middle plot show that the data has moved up more towards the reference data. And you can also see how this correction has changed the data in the percentage saturation of oxygen in the bottom left panel, and in the bottom right panel are profiles of dissolved oxygen. And you can see where the black points are the original points, and they're offset from in this case, the World Ocean Atlas climatology data, which is the blue points. And then when the float data has been corrected, it's the red points and much more in line with the reference data sets. So this is just an example of how we are able to take the data that would be flagged as bad but potentially correctable and adjust it to make it QC flag 1 and considered good data. And here's just another example of how we can align the data. And after that's been carried out with the reference data, we can also validate our measurements with other independent data sets. So this is an example from the St. George float that we've seen before, where the light blue points in both figures are CTD profiles, and then the purple and yellow points are the float profiles closest to when that CTD took place. And we can see that the patterns somewhat align, at least in the profile on the figure on the right. But there's still some degree of offset, and that might be because of the coefficients that were chosen for this processing. So this is going to change in the future, but was just an example of how we can compare to CTD data. And the same as Delphine said, we want to document these, and so that anybody who is using the float data can look through this metadata and see what changes have been applied to the raw real-time data to get to the adjusted data. So this is here showing that in the non-George float example, Locadox was used comparing to WOA data, and below you can add all of the coefficients that are used to adjust the data are included in the metadata as well. So we've already had some people touching on different ways of looking at Argo data, but to have them all kind of brought together in 1 or 2 slides. So this is the international Argo access points. We have in red here on the left the direct access. So you can go to the FTP or the HTTPS, and the layout is similar to is the same as how Delphine had run through it before, with the different folder configurations to show the different files depending on the data that you're interested in. If you're interested in the profiles or the synthetic profile data, or the trajectory data, you can go here. And then if you're wanting every month, the data is compiled with a DOI. And so you can get monthly versions of the data, and this is useful for repeatability of scientific studies. So if you want to extract data at a specific point and be able to point back to that time and say the data were taken at this point, then this is a good access point for you, especially because data can be changed in quality control after the point that you might have downloaded it. There's also, if you're on cloud infrastructure, or we have a S3 bucket on Amazon Cloud, which can enhance access performance and computing capabilities. And in orange at the bottom left, there's, as we've mentioned before, the Ocean Ops, the metadata monitoring. So this is kind of the regulation level, high level monitoring, high level network monitoring. So this is to make sure that everything is kept track of in line with regulations, as has been mentioned already today. And then there's also other external products that you can go to. So there's Argo recognized gridded products at the Argo website, where these are kind of pre-processed, or some groups have processed the Argo data into gridded products, which might be easier for use, and different other different data aggregators as well, depending on how you like to download your data, perhaps in line with other data sets, not just Argo. And from a Euro-Argo perspective, we have developed different data services. Delphine mentioned the vocabulary server, which has got the explanations of the QC and some of the metadata codes. We've had an introduction to the fleet monitoring and the Argo data selection, which are these user-friendly GUIs to look at the data, the Argo data, and also the ERDAP, which I've forgotten what that is now.
Data selection.
Another data selection location. And we're going to have an introduction to argoPy from Guillaume in just a moment. And there's also, as Delphine mentioned, these indexes of the data for being able to identify and find Argo data across the array. And there's also a synchronization tool. If you have a local copy of the Argo data, you can use this tool to sync when you want to, instead of manually updating your local data set. And just as an example of how much data has been downloaded over the past 10 years, it's fairly consistent in terms of the visitors and users of the FTP and data as well, with a spike in 2018.
So I'm going to present you with a Python library named argoPy that is dedicated to the to make it easy for the end users and the scientists to download, access, and work with the Argo data. So the problem the library is trying to solve, as everyone has already presented this afternoon, is that it's kind of very complex to address the vast amount of expertise that is required to access and manipulate the data before you move on to your scientific analysis. So for instance, you have several communication protocols to get access to the data, like the FTP, the HTTP, the F3, and so on. You can also handle your local copy of the GDAC, and more, we also have web APIs to access some of the Argo data. So in a regular scientific analysis workflow, you would start by scripting something to fetch the data, and then you would kind of pre-process and manipulate the data. And then that's only at the end of the process that you start your analysis. And as you've seen before, all these preliminary steps, the fetching and the manipulation, they require a lot of learning about the format of the netCDF files, the vocabulary that is used by Argo, the conventions that makes you to select the data using the QC flags, the data modes, and so on. And not even talking about the technical programming of handling the different protocols. So argoPy is trying to fit in just between the data and the end users, whether they are beginners or experts with regard to the Argo dataset. And argoPy provides a lot of high levels for beginners and low levels for experts tools to fetch and manipulate the data. So that's a library we've been developing and maintaining for the last 5 years now. All right, so let's get started right into it. So to install argoPy is distributed like with all the classic Python library distribution packages like Conda and Pipe. argoPy is compatible with all the major OS systems, and it works with Python version 3.11 and 3.12. Okay, and it's continuously tested, so we ensure that any new features in the library is systematically workable, working within this large environment possibilities. So I copy-pasted on the chat box of the Zoom a link for you to try, if you wish, to open up a Jupyter notebook online and where argoPy is installed and where we can try some of the features of the argoPy library. So if we, okay, I'm gonna need to stop sharing this presentation and then move on to this one. And let me see if I go and share my web browser. That should be this one. Share. Okay. So I guess you see my screen now. I'm going to reduce this one. So if you go on the Euro-Argo Dev repository on GitHub, that's where the Euro-Argo ERIC is pouring all its code base dedicated to Argo. And then you go down a little bit, and if you try to look for argoPy, it should be right at the top of the list of the many softwares distributed on the Euro-Argo Dev. And if we go on the code source page of argoPy, if you go down a little bit, there is the README file. And I propose you to click on that button over there to kickstart a Jupyter notebook online. So it's the same link as I copy-pasted on the chat box. I'm going to do it as a demo, a live demo with you. A few minutes to spawn the resources online to start this service. And let's get started. Here we go. So we are not going to use exactly this one, the playground notebook. We're going to use the basic features for Argo Core. That is the other notebook over there, okay? And with this notebook, I'm going to take you through the argoPy features to download the Argo data, to manipulate the data, to complement the data set, and then to run some diagnostics. And hopefully you'll see how argoPy try to make these things easier. So the first step is to import the library. So typically from argoPy, you would import the data fetcher object. The other functions are for just plotting, so these are not the key features. So we focus on the data fetcher in here. So I'm going to execute this cell. So Python is importing the libraries and so on. So if we want to download Argo data for a specific space and time region, we start by defining a regional box with the minimum and maximum longitudes, latitudes, pressure, and dates. So that's what I'm going to do here. And then we create an instance of the data fetcher where we use the dot region method to indicate to the data fetcher that we want to load the data for this specific box. And then we trigger the data download with the dot load method. So let's run this cell. Whoops, sorry for the noise. So what argoPy is doing right there is to transform the box definition into a query that is sent to the AirDAP version of the GDAC Argo data on the Ephemer website. And then when it receives the data, it also post-processes the data by selecting the correct QC flags for you to start to work with, by merging as well the data modes and so on, so that you have a simplified version of the data set that is way easier to work with than the raw Argo data. So these are the just don't get me wrong, these are the raw Argo data. The data measurements are not modified, but as you can see here in the list of the variables for the data set that is returned by argoPy, you see that you have way less variables and parameters than in a regular Argo netCDF files. You will have the cycle number, the data mode, the QC flags, and then only pressure, salinity, and temperature. And there's not many more fields into it. It's been simplified by argoPy. And that's pretty much it for the high-level API. It only takes you like 2 lines to download the Argo data for a specific region in space and time. It is as easy as that. So let's try to see a little bit what argoPy has done to the data. So the DS object, which is an X-ray dataset returned by argoPy, has a processing history attribute that provides you with the list of what we've done with the data. So you see that we merge the adjusted and real-time variables for pressure, temperature, and salinity according to the data mode. As it was explained before, in real time, the data are in PSAL, for instance, and in delayed or adjusted real time, the data are stored into the PSAL_adjusted data. It's kind of a complex processing. So this has been merged so that in PSAL, you have just the appropriate data according to the data mode. And then the points have been filtered to retain only the QC flag values 1 and 2. So if you're wondering if you can get the raw Argo data without any processing, it is also possible to do it by specifying some options in the creation of the data fetcher in here. So let's try to do it. And we're going to do it here right after that. So let's create a data fetcher and process the data with less processing so that we are as close as possible to the raw data. And to do that, we are going to use the mode option that takes by default the standard user mode. That's what has been used in the previous fetching. But you can also use the expert mode so that, let's do it in one line. In expert mode, argoPy won't manipulate the data automatically for you. So you will have the raw data. Let's do this in one line. It's going to take a few seconds because we need to refetch the data, the raw data. And here we go. So you see, we now have nearly 3,000 points. And we have a little bit more variables so that you can now see that you have the temperature and the temperature adjusted fields. Okay, so these are the raw variables in the netCDF files. And to the opposite, if you want to simplify the data set to the extreme for your research analysis, there is the research mode that is going to select only the delayed mode variables and the high quality QC flags, and with low error values on the pressure measurements. And if we execute this cell to get the data in research mode, you will have the quintessence of the Argo data for a scientific analysis. Whoops, or maybe that was, there we go. Is it connected? So hopefully the notebook is still on? No, okay. So let's do this again. There we go. Is it my notebook that is totally down? I say, oh, that's the demo effect. Server connection. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so let's start over. Here we go. So I'm going to move back to the repository, then click again to kickstart the notebook. Maybe I overpass the memory use allocated to the notebook. That's why it was shut down. So in the meantime, I can move on to show you some features. Here we go. So the data fetcher, as I showed you, can take the dot region extension here to select data for a space and time domain, including the pressure axis. You can also use the dot float method to select data for one or more WMOs. And you can, at last, use the dot profile method to select specific cycle numbers. So here it's illustrated with a single WMO, but you can also provide in here a list of WMOs. So for instance, it could be very easy to download only the first cycle number for a collection of floats. When you created the data fetcher and pointed it to a selection of data, you can trigger the download of the data with two X-array or a simple call to the dot data attribute. And what you get is a X-array dataset with the Argo data in it. Is it back? Yes. So let's move on in here. Let's get back. We import the data fetcher. I define a region. So let's reduce a little bit the time series length so that it can go a little bit faster. And then here, in here, I'm going to use the research user mode. Here we go. So you see in the print of the data fetcher, you see some of the key informations you need, like the origin of the data, your data selection, the API that is used by argoPy to download the data, the user mode, the data set. In this case, it's the physical data set, so it's only for PTS. I'll explain in a minute how to get the BGC variables, and there's more flags for performances. So the data set in this case, where we use the research user mode, you see the data set as the least number of points because the filters applied to the raw data are the strongest, the more selective. And in this case, we significantly reduce the number of variables so that you can focus only on your analysis and get rid of the Argo jargon. So in this case, you will have only the cycle number, the direction of the profile, the platform number. So these are kind of still technical, but quite okay. And then you have three parameters with the values and the error estimate to work with. And that's, I guess, what you need for a scientific analysis without any perturbation from the Argo jargon. If you call on the .argo extension to the dataset, you will have access to many methods to manipulate the data. So that's provided by argoPy. If you have any X-array dataset with any recognized data from an Argo selection of floats or floats, you will have the .argo extension available to get more methods. So let's do it. So you see in this case, the .argo indicates that you have that amount of points and then about 162 profiles for that amount of vertical levels. So how to manipulate the data? So as you see in here, the data set that is returned by default by argoPy is a collection of points. meaning that the collection of vertical profiles has been stacked to provide a very efficient collection of points that is reducing drastically the amount of nans that you will have in a selection where low and high vertical resolution profiles will be mixed up, where some profiles can have one parameter and some of the other profiles no. By working with just a collection of points, argoPy is making the manipulation and the download of the data much more efficient. But still, for many reasons, you can still work with a collection of profiles, and the way to manipulate the data to move from profiles to points is to use the .argo .point2profile method. And in doing so, you will transform the collection of points into a collection of profiles with a similar number of levels. That's the more classic way to look at the Argo data. And then you can move on and transform again this collection of profiles into a collection of points by using the opposite method, the profile to points. And then we get again a number of points. So one of the manipulation methods that is offered by argoPy is a vertical interpolator and a vertical group by pressure bins reduction method. So here we illustrate these methods with the interpolator. So we can define a vertical axis. So in this case, from 0 to 2000 decibars with a point every 5 decibars. And the .argo attributes comes with the interp standard depth pressure levels methods, which takes only the vertical axis that you want to interpolate all the profiles on. And you see in one line, you get an efficient and accurate vertical interpolation of the data. And in this case, because we interpolate the data, we make it clear to the user that it's no longer the original pressure axis by adding the underscore interpolated string to the pressure axis. So this pressure interpolated dimension and coordinate as the standard depth levels that we provided with the method. And in this case, all the profiles have been interpolated, and you can move on to your analysis with this. Another way to manipulate the data is usually to complement the dataset with more variables that are originally available in the Argo dataset. And in particular, you can use the equation of state library to complement the dataset. So, for instance, you would use the .argo.theostem method to do so. So, in this case, let's try to compute the Brunt-Väisälä frequency and, for instance, the conductivity. We provide a list of variables, and then the dataset in here will be returned with the new variables computed into it. And it's done efficiently because we optimized all the computation of the profiles. So if you have 10 profiles or thousands of profiles, the computation is made in parallel, and it's very efficient to compute and very fast. We can extend this per profile diagnostic by using your own Python function. So if you have a function that computes a single value out of a vertical profile, so this is illustrated here with the mixed layer depth computation, it is very easy to execute this function on the dataset of your profile by using the reduce per profile function. So you use the reduce profile, you give your function, and you see in this case, the parameters that are really needed are pressure and the potential density, right? So we need to add the potential density to the dataset. So we're going to add it in here. There we go. There. So you see, by using the TOS10 method, I added the potential density to the data set. So it's in at the end of the data set. We also automatically complement all the parameters with the appropriate attributes. And we can now compute the mixed layer depth. There we go. Using our own diagnostic that is taking a single profile, and we let argoPy broadcast and compute in parallel this specific method that can be all yours. This is just an illustration for the mixed layer depth computation. So TOS10, we already talked about it. That's the reduce profile illustration I've just run. It's 4:15. Before moving on to this, I'm going to share this part of the presentation to complement a little bit what you can do with the data manipulation. So these are the user mode I already introduced. This is for the data set. We'll get back to this in a second. So that's the profile and point manipulation over there. Already shown the interpolation on standard depth levels and the group by pressure bins I talk about. I illustrated in the notebook the TOS10 method to complement your data set, but we also adding progressively more and more complementary modules with documented and published methods accepted by the community. So for instance, last year we added a BGC optical modeling module to compute the aphotic depths of a profile. Obviously, these are for the BGC profiles. You can also compute the first optical depths and so on, some characteristics for a possible deep chlorophyll maximum and so on. And we also added BGC nutrients and carbonate system variables computation using published Canyon and Canyon B and content neural networks predictors. So if you have your data set, you use the .argo, .canyon, .content, .predict methods, and your data set will be automatically complemented with the computation, the prediction of the nitrates and the carbonates using these neural networks predictors. And that's the reduced profile I already illustrated. Here it's illustrated with another method. If you want to quickly look at the data, so in argoPy, we don't focus on plottings because you, the scientist, will do whatever the plots you want for your papers. But we still provide quick and dirty plots to have quick looks to the data. So these are some examples of the visualization tools. And before maybe the questions, I can briefly illustrate how to get the BGC variables. So the BGC variables can be accessed by using the dataset selection argument. It's called DS. So by default, the value is 5 for the physical variables, but you can switch it to BGC so that you can get basically the synthetic profiles data from the GDAC. And in using the DS equal BGC argument, 2 more options comes in because there are many, way too much BGC variables for a specific thematic use. So we ended up with the conclusion that in many situations, the scientist will only will be using at a subset of all these parameters. So we implemented the params argument where you can provide a single or a list of BGC parameters, and the data feature will only return a data set with these specific variables if available on the floats of the selection, obviously. And you can complement this parameter with the measured parameter, which will add a secondary step to the data selection process, that is to remove all the nans. So if you specify a list of parameters with the params argument, whether it is an explicit list or just the specific keyword all for all the possible parameters. If you use measured, you will be sure that the data set that is returned won't have none for the specified variables of the measured argument. All right, so I guess it should run to 4:30, so that's a few minutes left. Maybe I can stop here and wait for questions, or if you have any idea of what you want me to illustrate you in the notebook, don't hesitate in the chat box. There are many more features. So maybe just to conclude, don't hesitate to look at the bibliography, the documentation online. The documentation is very exhaustive. You have all the informations on all the features of argoPy. There are many more experts and advanced tools to manipulate and access the data in argoPy, and the documentation is really complete about that. And if you get lost a little bit, there's a cheat sheet PDF document that is available as well. It's just a few pages that you can print and lay on your desktop, and it's a shortened and how do you say that? It's a shortened version of the documentation with basically just the list of all the features that are available on argoPy, the visualization, the BGC, some stuff for the QC and the advanced and the experts people. Users. All right, I think I can stop here. That's already a lot. Still, it's just a few and quick lookup to all the features in argoPy. So do you have any questions? Maybe to give you some clues, in the document online documentation, you have an example section that are dedicated to some BGC visualization. And there's a tutorials and training section that provides you with a bunch of Jupyter notebooks that help you get started with more specific features. And if you go on the argoPy -training repository on Euro-Argo Dev, you will have access to the installation process, a more detailed procedure, and then all the content of the notebooks. And over there, you still have the possibility to start an online notebook that is directly available with all the notebooks of the tutorials. So if you have a more specific issue or question, it's probably hopefully addressed in some of the notebooks, okay? So for instance, you have 5 notebooks about the data fetching, to select and fetch the data, to select the user mode, some specific on the BGC data, how to directly access one specific float data, and how to handle a large regional data selection. Then you can have a look to the 4 notebooks on the data manipulation, basically the filtering, the vertical interpolation, and the computation of additional variables for your analysis. And then there's a secondary collection of notebooks that are more targeting the expert users or the operators, and that are dedicated to the Argo vocabulary, exploration and discovery, and the Argo index files analysis.